Welcome to Introduction to Philosophy of the Human Person, and today we are going to study topic 5, logic. And under logic, we will be learning laws of logic and deductive argument. Let's go. Okay, so very important na sa pag-aaral ng logic ay makilala natin si Aristotle. Okay, and if you are already familiar with the big three, that's Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So, according to Aristotle, wisdom starts with understanding yourself. Although I may not agree with Aristotle, but that's his famous line. Aristotle was born around 384 BC. Pag sinabing BC, yan ay before Christ. Pag BCE, yan ay before Common Era. Or yung kapanganakan mismo ni Christ, yung generation ni Christ, yan yung Common Era. In 338 BC, Aristotle returned to Macedonia and began tutoring the 13-year-old son of King Philip, na si Alexander the Great. While Plato's academy, which was now directed by Xenocrates, was still the major school in the city, Aristotle decided to create his own school called the Lyceum. So, ito ay parang bombshell sa atin na the first man who actually used the terminology lyceum or coined the term lyceum to put up a school or to name it sa isang school ay si Aristotle pala. Now, while Aristotle focused on many different subjects, one of his most significant contributions to the world of philosophy and Western thought was his use of logic. Now, hindi po inimbento ni Aristotle ang logic. Very important na malaman ninyo itong mga listeners and mga students na hindi si Aristotle yung founder or nag-invent ng laws of logic or yung logic mismo. Rather, he believes that logic is a tool. Logic was discovered by Aristotle and is a tool used to attain knowledge and was therefore the very first step in the learning process. Logic enables us to discover errors and establish truths. Okay, sa pamamagitan ng logic, we are able to discover errors and establish truths. In his book Prior Analytics, Aristotle introduced the notion of syllogism, which we will be learning today, which turned out to be one of the most important contributions to the field of logic. So parang ganito yan. Ang logic ay parang lenses. Hindi lang siya basta lenses, kundi microscopic lenses. It is the science of argument evaluation. Para ma-evaluate natin kung ang argument ba ay sound, ang argument ba ay true, ang argument ba ay fallacious, or based on falsehood. So sa pamamagitan ng logic as a tool, we are able to discover truth from errors. Bago tayo pumunta sa formal logic, mga syllogisms, punta muna tayo sa tinatawag nating laws of logic. Laws of logic is defined uh, as rules of correct reasoning, sometimes rules of inference. And once we violate the laws of logic, ang ang ibig sabihin nun is nagkakaroon ng incorrectness sa ating reasoning. And there are three laws of logic. There is one, the law of non-contradiction. Second, the law of excluded middle. And third, the law of identity. Ang character po ng laws of logic na ito, first one is they are true by nature. They cannot be falsified. Sila ay totoo kahit anong gawin mo, kahit ayawan mo siya na pwedeng maging false yan. No, it cannot be falsified. They are true by nature. They are also immaterial. Ibig sabihin, hindi siya gawa sa atoms and molecules. They are universal. Ibig sabihin, they are always true everywhere. Kahit saan ka magpunta. Magpunta ka ng Mars, magpunta ka ng Jupiter, kahit saan. Okay? Laws of logic is true everywhere. Next, invariant or unchanging. Ito ay hindi nagbabago. Ibig sabihin, yung 1 plus 1 equals 2, that proposition, 1 plus 1 equals 2, simula nung bata tayo, is the same 1 plus 1 equals 2 hanggang ngayon. It doesn't change. And we believe that 1 plus 1 equals 2 as a proposition will still be true in the future. Hanggang sa mamatay ako, mamatay tayong lahat, mapuksa tayong lahat na nabubuhay dito sa daigdig. They are not dependent on space, time, physical properties, or human nature. They are not the product of the physical universe. Bakit? Kasi if the physical universe were to disappear, laws of logic would still be true. And we will discover that later on. And they are not product of human minds because, of course, ang human mind ay hindi po siya absolute. When we want to implement something we think to be true, or convincing ay hindi natin siya ma-implement universally. Okay? But laws of logic, hindi natin siya kailangan i-implement. Bakit? Dahil ginagamit na kaagad natin siya. Deny it and you affirm its existence. Unahin natin yung the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction states that a proposition and its negation cannot be both true at the same time and in the same sense. So let's say, for example, I have a proposition, the sky is blue. The negation of that proposition is the sky is not blue. Or if you want to sound more intelligent, it is not the case that the sky is blue. But it's much more easier to say the sky is not blue as the negation of the proposition the sky is blue. So, ang negation, guys, is the direct opposite of the original proposition by adding not, or it is not the case. So if we have the proposition the sky is blue, just add the sky is not. Now, pag magkasama ang proposition at negation sa isang sentence, therefore yung sentence na yon ay automatically false. For example, the sky is blue and not blue. So that statement is already false. Bakit? That statement is contradictory. It shows a contradiction. It violates the law of non-contradiction. Bakit? Sabi ko, the sky is blue and not blue. Hindi po pwede yon kasi nga ang formula natin sa law of non-contradiction, proposition and negation cannot be both true at the same time and in the same sense. Next, we have the law of excluded middle. It states that either the proposition is true or its negation is true. Going back, if we have a proposition, the sky is blue, what will be its negation? The negation is the sky is not blue. Now, from the proposition and negation, kung mamimili tayo, alin sa kanila ang tama? Madali lang. Ang tama is yung proposition. The sky is blue. Okay? So, let's try another one. The sky is green. What will be the negation? The sky is not green. So, yun yung negation. Now, from the two of them, which one is true? Of course, the sky is not green. So, ganun sa law of excluded middle. Two choices, true dichotomy. Dalawa lang ang pagpipilian. Either the proposition is true or the negation is true. Kaya nga sa exams natin, may mga true or false, di ba? There is no such thing as neutral position pagdating sa when we are doing philosophy. Last but not the least, the third law, law of identity. Something is what it is and isn't what it is not. So it simply states that if P, then if P. If the proposition is true, it is true. If the proposition is false, it is false. Or simply say, if the proposition is true, then it cannot be false. Same goes with if the proposition is false, then it cannot be true. Ganon lang yung law of identity or a thing is itself. Now, very important na malaman natin yung mga laws na ito, like for example, the law of identity. So, alam natin kung ang tao ay nagsisinungaling ba o hindi dahil sa pamamagitan ng mga laws na ito na i-evaluate natin yung coherence ng kanyang mga statement kung nagkakabuhol-buhol Ba iyon, lalo na sa law of identity. If you say yes, then it's yes. If you say no, then it's no. Either yes or no, love excluded middle. Yes and no cannot be both true at the same time and in the same sense or magkasama sa isang sentence. And of course, magkaiba when we prove paradoxes. Iba yun. Ibang topic na yun. Of course, let's proceed to syllogism. A syllogism is a systematic representation of a single logical inference. Pag sinabing inference, guys, yun yung the process of drawing conclusion. Not necessarily a conclusion. However, nagagamit din siya minsan. What's your inference on this one? Or by necessary inference. Ibig sabihin, you are on the process of drawing conclusion. Yun yung inferencing. It has three parts: major premise, minor premise, and conclusion. Now, kapag kompleto yan, tinatawag din yan na argument. At i-elaborate po natin yung argument na yan. Now, when we say premise, sa syllogism, interchangeably used siya ng proposition, statement, or assertion. Premise, proposition, statement, or assertion. In other words, a premise is an assumption that something is true. It is a step in an argument put forward toward establishing some conclusions. Let's elaborate the parts of syllogism. First one, major premise. Major premise contains the predicate of the conclusion. Minor premise contains the subject of the conclusion. And the conclusion combines the major and the minor premise with a therefore symbol. When all the premises are true and the syllogism is correctly constructed, a syllogism is a logical argument. So, explain po natin isa-isa later dahil yung mga parts ng syllogism pag in-examine na po natin ang isang deductive argument. Okay, let's define first what is an argument. Argument is not the same as fighting. Magkaiba po yung pagtatalo na nakikita natin sa ating bahay, sa mga kaibigan. Magkaiba sila sa tinatawag natin na formal logic, yung mga argument, syllogism, magkaiba siya. So in logic and philosophy, an argument is a series of statements called the premises or premises. It's intended to determine the degree of truth of another statement, the conclusion. So yung argument, ginagamit din ito sa mga courtroom scenario. Okay? Kung alin ang stronger argument, so on and so forth. And there are five: deductive, inductive, abductive, argument by analogy, and reductio ad absurdum. We will only be learning two sa subject na ito since this is just an introductory. Okay, deductive argument or argument by deduction is one of the two basic types of logical inference. The other one is inductive argument. A logical inference is a connection from the first statement, a premise, to a second statement, conclusion, for which the rules of logic show that if the first statement is true, the second statement should be true down to the conclusion. Okay? So let's have our first and most well-known deductive argument example. All men are mortal. That's the major premise. Socrates is a man. That's the minor premise. And therefore, Socrates is mortal. So makikita natin ano yung sabi ko kanina? Um, the major premise contains the predicate of the conclusion. Makita yung mortal yung predicate, mortal yung predicate ng conclusion. Sa major premise, mortal ang predicate. Sa conclusion, mortal yung predicate. Ano yung sabi ko sa minor premise kanina? It contains the subject of the conclusion. Socrates is the subject of the minor premise. Socrates is the subject of the conclusion. Okay? Now, as long as both premises are true, the conclusion must be true as well. This kind of reasoning where one fact leads to another is called entailment. Ano ang ibig sabihin ng entailment? Once we know that all men are mortal and that Socrates is a man, those two facts, itong two facts na ito, major and minor premise, those two facts entail Socrates is mortal. Kailangan magkaroon ng entailment yung dalawang premises doon sa conclusion or else hindi magiging deductively valid ang isang argument. Deductive argument begins, take note, deductive argument begins with universal quantifiers like all, everything, everyone, and no and nothing or no one. Okay, yun yung mga universal quantifiers. And in this case, we know about what we know about human mortality and reasons down to specific. After ng universal quantifier ay specific subject and conclusion specific subject. Carry down the conclusion of the major premise to the uh, carry down the predicate of the major premise down to the predicate of the conclusion. What's great about deductive argument is that the truth of the premises must lead to the truth of the conclusion. And when this happens, we say that the argument is valid. Okay? So kanina, valid. Let's try another one. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates was Plato's teacher. So, what can you say about this argument? Is this a deductively sound argument? Is this a valid argument? Observe. But the conclusion is true, right? Okay, so regardless if the conclusion is true, pero tandaan natin, kapag walang entailment na nangyari, walang entailment, yung conclusion doesn't entail from the two premises. Walang kinalaman yung pagiging teacher ni Plato kay Socrates sa kanyang human mortality. Kaya ito po ay invalid. This is an invalid deductive argument. So what do we have so far? So meron tayong dalawang bagay na i-observe sa tuwing gumagawa tayo ng deductive argument or sa tuwing nag-e-examine tayo ng isang deductive argument. Number one is validity. Number two is yung truth. Okay? Truth and validity is not the same. Hindi porket valid, yan ay true. Hindi naman porket true, yan ay valid. So if your premises don't guarantee the truth of your conclusion, then you can end up with some really crappy arguments like this one. All cats are mammals. It is true. Second, I am a mammal. That's also true. Conclusion, therefore, I am a cat. And that's false. Okay, this is an example of an invalid argument because the conclusion doesn't entail from the premises. At makikita pa lang natin guys na sa formula na pinrovide natin kanina sa parts of syllogism is that the major premise contains the predicate of the conclusion. Wala yung mammal or mammals dito sa conclusion. Kaya makikita kaagad natin na, oy, ito ay invalid. Okay? And all cats are mammals, but not all mammals are cats. However, you can actually have a perfectly valid argument and still have a false conclusion. Paano mangyayari yon? If any of your premises are false. Let's say, for example, all humans came from monkeys. My student Mariano is a human. Therefore, Mariano came from monkeys. O, di ba? This is still a valid argument. However, truth is not the same as validity. Hindi porket valid ito, then therefore we can guarantee the truth of the argument. So, bakit siya naging mali? Because we start from the false premise. Now, let's say for example, gagawin nating invalid ito. All humans came from monkeys. My student Mariano is a human. Therefore, Mariano's favorite food is kare-kare. So walang entailment yung yung conclusion from the truth of the two premises. Yung walang kinalaman yung kanyang favorite food na kare-kare doon sa kanyang origin ng kanyang race or ng kanyang humanity. Okay? And doon po nagtatapos ang ating lesson for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys, and have a great day. God bless you. And please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future content.